The second section of this chapter is called The Discipline of Pure Reason with Regard to its Polemical Use. Polemical, that means like in a fight, right? When we meet some opponent who makes claims that are the opposite of our claims, we want to fight them, right? We want to prove our position to be true and their position to be false, and we use reason to do that. In fact, Kant has already indicated most of the history of philosophy looks like this. Several proponents of contradictory dogmatic positions, right? One of them maybe claiming that God exists and one claiming that God doesn't exist. One of them claiming that the world is eternal, one of them claiming that the world was created, and so on and so forth. They meet each other, they fight using arguments, and in the end, nothing gets decided. Okay, what is going on? How should we think about reason in its polemical use? Well, first of all, Kant says there are these conflicts, and some of them are not illusory. So we saw in the antinomy that some of the conflicts about freedom and about the eternity of the world, maybe, some of them, they seem to be based on a pure misunderstanding. They seem to be based on a misunderstanding of what the world was, or, in the case of freedom, they were based on a misunderstanding of the relation between the two positions. Because the claim that everything in nature is determined and the claim that human actions are free actually, according to Kant, turned out to be compatible. So there was really no antithetic of reason there, no conflict of reason with itself, and so, rightly understood, no polemic. However, Kant says, and this is A741, however, such a misunderstanding cannot be alleged and the conflict of reason thereby set aside if, say, it is asserted theistically there is a highest being, and asserted atheistically, on the contrary, there is no highest being. Right? Those are cases, for instance, about the soul and about God, when reason can, at least different dogmatic thinkers, can actually come into conflict with each other. There's no misunderstanding. They know that they are making opposite and opposed claims. Of course, we already know what Kant's answer to that is going to be. But what he is going to be especially interested here is that nobody can at any point prove either of these two claims. Right? That is what the dialectic has shown to us, and in a sense the analytic already showed to us. Nobody will ever be able to prove that God exists or that God doesn't exist, to use this example. So we can be entirely unconcerned, this is in the middle of 742, we can be entirely unconcerned that somebody will someday prove the opposite. We therefore do not have to think up scholastic proofs, but can always assume these propositions, which are quite consistent with the speculative interest of our reason in its empirical use, and are moreover the only means for uniting this with the practical interest. So Kant is once again asserting that we can, for instance, just assume the existence of God, as long as we are careful to say that we don't know it, that we can't prove it, but to assume it for practical reasons, in the safe knowledge that nobody will ever be able to disprove us. And so he says at A743, thus there is properly no antithetic of pure reason at all, for the only battleground for it would have to be sought in the field of pure theology and psychology, but this ground will bear no warrior in full armor and equipped with weapons that are to be feared. Right? Everyone who tries to give a proof here, we know in advance, having done the critique, that what they are going to say, that these proofs are going to fail. This is an opportunity for Kant to talk once again about freedom of speech, really. And he's going to talk about that at some length. And we understand why he would talk about that in this context, because well, maybe not so much now, at least not in the kind of country where I'm talking, but certainly in Kant's time, going out and saying things like God doesn't exist, and here's my proof that God doesn't exist, was kind of frowned upon, right? I mean, I don't think that in Kant's Prussia you would have been like burnt at the stake or something like that, but you might have been censured, right? I mean, censored in the most literal sense of the word, like your book's not allowed to appear. I don't know, you might lose your university position, and so on and so forth. If I recall correctly, Spinoza, who of course doesn't quite say that, but does make some very unorthodox claims about God, got an offer for a university appointment in Germany, and the offer sort of subtly told him that, of course, we assume that you will be, you will think about which of your positions to actually teach, right? I mean, be a bit careful, right? Don't say all the things that you believe. Well, that is something that Kant thinks is terrible. He thinks everyone should be able to speak their mind in these matters of reason, right? I mean, give your arguments, say what you believe or what you doubt, allow free discussion, because that can only be good. We don't have to fear anything, because no one is ever going to be able to really disprove God or anything like that. But going through these arguments would have put us on the path towards critique much sooner, and anyway can only be useful for sharpening our critique and understanding things. And it's even a basic point of honesty and good morals, that we should not be forced to lie about what we actually believe. So Kant says, A744, let your opponent speak only reason and fight him solely with weapons of reason. For the rest, do not worry about the good cause of practical reason, for that never comes into play in a merely speculative dispute. Right? We can have these discussions. Don't worry. They don't have sort of any immediate consequence for the practical. I don't think Kant is saying that if you think that murder is great, or let's take an even more pointed example. If you think that everyone who doesn't come from Germany should be killed, okay, I don't think that, or Prussia is maybe the better example here. Everyone who's not from Prussia should be killed. That's not the kind of idea that Kant is talking about, right? I mean, that is a practical claim, and a terrible practical claim, which we might want to keep out of the public sphere. Let these people do what they want. If they exhibit talent, if they exhibit deep and new research, in a word, if only they exhibit reason, then reason always wins, Kant tells us. If you grasp at means other than unconcerned reason, if you cry high treason, if you call together the public, which understands nothing of such subtle refinements, as if they were to put out a fire, then you make yourself ridiculous. And again, I should think that there is nothing in the world less compatible with the aim of maintaining a good cause than duplicity, misrepresentation, and treachery. And Kant points out that many people who have been defending God are probably doing that in order to, become popular, win approval, whereas people who have attacked the existence of God definitely didn't do it for those reasons, but purely for their intellectual reasons, for their honesty. And so he says at A750, thus honesty of disposition often stands in an inverse relation to the goodness of the cause itself, and the latter has perhaps more upright and sincere opponents than defenders. Right? That maybe the people who are defending the bad cause in intellectual matters actually tend to be better people than the people who defend the good cause. Okay. Again, A753. I mean, Kant thinks this is pretty important. He keeps talking about it. He says, when I hear that an uncommon mind has demonstrated away the freedom of the human will, the hope of a future life, and the existence of God, I am eager to read the book, for I expect that his talents will advance my insights. Not so much, Kant says, because I think he might be right. I don't think he might be right. But he will probably have some new, subtle, interesting thoughts that will allow me to sharpen my own philosophical thinking. I want to read that. And he says, I don't want to read, the kind of people who publish endless tracts defending the existence of God. I know what they are doing. That's not so interesting to me. This is interesting. What about the young? Should our students be allowed to read all these terrible people? Yes, of course, Kant says. But we should also teach them critique, right? We should teach them criticism. We should teach them the critique of pure reason. which is exactly what I'm doing right now. Because with that, reading all these dogmatic claims and seeing how to dissolve them, that is actually the best possible study that they can have. All right, and here, final quote from this part of the section. This is A756, and I like this. I like this quote. You know, all these polemics, they've been sort of unmasked as illusory, and so Kant writes this: there is accordingly no real polemic in the field of pure reason. Both parties fence in the air and wrestle with their shadows, for they go beyond nature, where there is nothing that their dogmatic grasp can seize and hold. Fight as they may, the shadows that they cleave apart grow back together in an instant, like the heroes of Valhalla, to amuse themselves anew in bloodless battles. That's a beautiful image for philosophical controversies. All right. So, Kant does something else. He has a sort of subsection here about skepticism. Why is Kant going to talk about skepticism? Well, what he wants to show, so there's this traditional view of skepticism, which comes from the ancient skeptics, that skepticism is actually great, right? It's not like this position of despair, like, oh, I know nothing. It's actually a place where human reason can come to rest, right? Once we know that we know nothing, that's nice. So that's what the skeptic actually wants to attain. To, maybe not know that we know nothing, but to never claim to know anything. To sort of continually be open to being wrong. That is supposed to be like the most relaxed state to be in. And so that's what skepticism wants to do. Well, that is not how Kant thinks about this, and so Kant has some pages where he talks about skepticism in order to show that no, skepticism has its proper role, but it is not the final dwelling place of human reason. He starts by saying that the consciousness of my ignorance, if this is not at the same time known to be necessary, the ignorance that is, should not end my inquiries, but is rather the proper cause to arouse them. Right? It's okay to know that we can't know something. Kant has told us a lot of things we can't know. That's not skepticism, right? It's a knowledge claim. If I know that I can't know whether God exists, that's a knowledge claim. That's okay. But if I just don't know something, I shouldn't end my inquiries, but, start my inquiries. And so, well, what is going on? Kant tells us, like, the place of skepticism in the development of philosophy. And he gives us a 3-stage reading of the history of philosophy. So here we are at A761. The first step in matters of pure reason, which characterizes its childhood, is dogmatic. Right? That is when we are making all these claims. We have these different philosophical schools fighting each other. The just mentioned second step is skeptical and gives evidence of the caution of the power of judgment sharpened by experience. Now, however, a third step is still necessary, which pertains only to the mature and adult power of judgment, which has as its basis firm maxims of proven universality, that namely which subjects to evaluation not the facta of reason, so not claims made by reason, but reason itself, as concerns its entire capacity and suitability for pure a priori cognitions. And that, of course, is the critique of pure reason. So we have here a 3-stage story of the history of philosophy: dogmatism, skepticism, which shows us the need for a critique of pure reason, and then the critique of pure reason. So clearly Kant is putting himself here at this adult stage of philosophy. And this again, this 3-step reading of history as a history of progress, this sort of points forward to things that we know from people like Hegel, right, in the generations after Kant. There are some nice pages at the end of this section on skepticism where Kant tries to explain what went wrong with Hume. Well, clearly what went wrong with Hume is that he didn't make all the distinctions and didn't have all the insights that Kant had. And so, for instance, he thought that because we can't get from experience this relation of causation, and because he didn't realize that we could think about the necessary a priori structure of possible experience, that's why he thought that, no grasp of causation was possible. And that's why he turned like this affinity in nature into a law of mere association of ideas, something purely psychological. And quite in general, the problem with Hume, Kant says, is that he discovers certain points where we are ignorant, where we can't know something. But he never sets out on the fully systematic question to draw a boundary to reason, right? To really systematically find out what we can know and what we can't know. If he had done that, then he would have been set on the true path of a critique, and he would have presumably ended up with something very much like Kant's own system, although Kant here doesn't go quite that far. Alright, that's what Kant has to tell us about the polemical use of reason. There are still two uses of reason left, which are the discipline of pure reason with regard to hypotheses, and the discipline of pure reason in regard to its proofs, which will be the subjects for the next video.